Don't take this the wrong way, but I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
Why are black people always being rewarded for being black?
What are you talking about, Aiden?
It just seems like in this country, black people are always being rewarded for crying over discrimination. It's like, come on, really?
I want to hear you out, but when you use generalizations like black people always, it makes me uncomfortable.
Okay, well, I don't want to be called out for my beliefs, okay?
He's got a point. Lately, it seems like bringing attention to black issues causes more problems.
Wait, how does acknowledging racism create more problems?
Racism, Bryce, I didn't say anything about racism.
But discrimination surrounding blackness is about racism.
Aiden, why does talking about racism make you mad?
This just feels like reverse racism to white people.
Black people and white people aren't fighting to win rewards. Anti-racist methods are meant to balance the inequalities created by racism. Do you all see what's happening here?
No. What's happening?
Does anyone notice how quickly we just spiraled?
Are you talking about how we all got angry?
Yeah, I see that.
Maybe this is a good time to talk about the spiral of injustice.
The what?
The spiral of injustice.
Okay, what is that?
The spiral of injustice is a way to understand how injustice devolves within a community, how the stages target, demean, and marginalize those deemed the other.
The spiral of injustice is what happened to Black Americans, people of color, and immigrants in the U.S.
Hold up. All of that is in the past. Why bring it up now? Today, anyone can live the American dream. No one is holding anyone back.
Racism isn't something that's only in the past.
There's definitely more freedom today, but what about continued racism and corruption?
None of us sitting here has anything to do with that.
Can't we just let go of all of that and try to move forward from where we are?
We can move forward, Devin.
That's what I'm saying. We have to move forward as a society instead of fixating on problems of the past.
But first we need to acknowledge two things. One, the compounded wealth and laws that have resulted in huge inequalities. And two, there are people today who actively try to perpetuate those inequalities.
We should use the spiral of injustice.
Krista, you're absolutely right. The first stage of the spiral of injustice is language. Think about the words black and white. Did you know that the words black, white, and the indigenous slur red were originally created as identity markers in our language?
So we didn't always use those racial terms?
Nope.
The idea of labeling race as color is pretty recent.
Totally. The hardening of racial lines happened in the mid-1600s when the American colonies were still governed by the British monarchy.
Isn't that the time period when some Virginian colonists were trying to break indigenous treaties? They wanted more indigenous land for more plantation crops.
Exactly. In 1675, there was a plantation owner, Nathaniel Bacon, who staged a rebellion to break those indigenous treaties so he could get more land. The aristocrats were hoarding land as opposed to sharing it with people like Bacon and the new working class. And at the same time, European indentured servants and some blacks were working off their debts to become freed. These workers wanted land for their crops.
The English squashed Bacon's rebellion in 1676. Out of fear, laws were passed to ensure rebellion would not happen again.
And how did they do that?
One way was racism. They invented the idea that race was defined by the color of your skin.
At first, it was by labeling Native Americans as red people. Through language, they gave people someone to hate.
It's amazing the power of words.
Yeah, but English immigrants were building our country.
They were also killing people to occupy the land for themselves. It was genocide.
When you reduce people to labels, you open the door to racism. And when people feel their label means that they're inherently different, they may strive to protect those differences.
Precisely after Bacon's rebellion, suddenly whiteness, maleness, and Englishness became referenced within political documents. I mean, don't even get me started on how women were being left out.
There we have white and non-white appearing in the language, a language creating the other.
I see. It's dehumanizing people through language. It chips away at people. In time, it gives license to commit worse acts against them.
Do you see how when you claim whiteness as having value, it devalues everything that isn't white?
Come on. Seriously? I'm not buying it.
Well, think about it this way. At first, the label white only applied to English-speaking white men. There were other Europeans, non-English speaking, with Italian or Middle Eastern-looking features who were not considered white, and neither were Jewish people.
Being English was more important than any physical whiteness. The English terrorized and invaded other white people. They took land from the Scottish, then the Irish, and the French and the Spanish weren't exactly friends with them either.
Okay, so if whiteness can change so easily, that means race isn't real. It's not fixed.
Well, and whiteness was used to justify continuing slavery in the U.S. over 50 years after it had already ended in England.
And what do you think became the marker to justify the torture and inhumanity?
Blackness.
Blackness in relation to perceived whiteness.
That's right. And what generated all the wealth that allowed the U.S. to separate from England?
Slavery. Hundreds of years of free labor from people who were labeled black. It was capitalism at its worst.
Except the labor wasn't free. U.S. wealth came at the expense of at least 60 million black lives, not to mention more than 45 million indigenous people who were killed.
Wow.
Throughout this period, many different groups immigrated into the U.S.
If blackness or being perceived as other resulted in the loss of rights or even death, what do you think the new groups did when they arrived?
They all try to present themselves as white.
Now you're getting it.
They had a self-interest in maintaining racism.
Or so they thought. It's ironic.
Ironic in what way?
What did the abolition of slavery and civil rights have in common?
They give rights to black people
Yes, and?
and everyone else.
Exactly. When democracy in the U.S. works for black people, it works for everyone else.
Yeah. The civil rights movement broke down barriers for all sorts of discrimination, racial and gender discrimination, sexual and religious discrimination, and discrimination against people with physical disabilities.
Just as language made whiteness into something, it made blackness into something as well. During slavery, blackness became a marker.
Hold on here. Slavery ended. I mean, we live in a great country right now. Look at how many freedoms are enjoyed by everyone. I understand we need to know the history, but if we continue to harp on it, all it's going to do is make white people feel bad and black people feel like victims. We need to teach people to celebrate how far we've come.
Aiden, do you think that racism ended the day slavery ended?
Well, no.
I mean, I agree with you. We do live in a great country today, but it's not perfect. When slavery first ended, black people were denied access to education, government grants, and land. I mean, black people were forced into underserved communities.
Okay, well, why didn't they just work harder? I mean, that's what people do today.
The myth that black people lack work ethic dehumanizes our community. It also dismisses active racism. Remember, during segregation, black Americans still paid taxes and served in the American military just like everyone else.
And black Americans actually did build prosperous communities.
And continue to do so.
Absolutely. Take the Tulsa, Oklahoma race massacre of 1921. It's an example of black Americans building prosperous businesses, schools, and cities. However, they were attacked for their success. Their communities were burned down and the people were murdered.
Why would that happen?
Some people believe that white meant they were entitled to more.
Yeah, I get that, but doesn't that just make all white people look evil?
All white people?
I don't think white people are bad people. We're talking about labels that affect people's beliefs about the world.
And behavior that accompanies those beliefs.
Exactly.
Hey, I just thought of something.
Yeah.
If there's racism that still exists today, there's still work to be done.
There's still a lot of work to be done, Devin. The next stage in the spiral of injustice is avoidance.
After slavery was abolished, avoidance became rampant. This included things like refusing access for black Americans to resources and civic participation.
And this ties directly into the next stage of the spiral of injustice, discrimination.
The The slave code stripped Black and African people of their human rights. It was illegal for them to learn how to read and write, and subjected them to some of the worst treatment known in recent history. Pretty discriminatory, if you ask me.
Well, next came the Black Codes. After slavery was abolished in 1865, the Black Codes were laws that severely restricted the ability to conduct business, own land, and vote too.
Whoa, I didn't realize that.
And how is that affecting us today?
Well, it influenced the development of the Jim Crow laws, which made segregation legal.
Didn't those laws end in 1965 because of the Civil Rights Act?
Yeah, but the Jim Crow laws were in place for decades.
Decades affect generations. It's corrosive.
That makes sense.
Discrimination leads to violence. These stages of the spiral of injustice don't necessarily happen in sequential order either. Is anyone surprised by the persistent violence against Black people that continues today?
Well, and anti-Semitic violence and anti-Asian violence has also spiked in recent years.
It's all connected. I guess it isn't all in the past then, is it?
I can see that, but what about all the good things white people have done to make the world better?
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
All of those wonderful things that white people have done, was it their whiteness that made things better, or was it their humanness?
What do you mean?
Well, there are people who are also white who have made wonderful contributions, but it wasn't because of the color of their skin.
Wonderful abilities are not limited to a specific race. That's what racism conditioned us to believe.
Human intelligence has no racial boundaries. All humans have invented technology, built civilizations, and developed governments throughout history.
Unless people actively discriminate against others.
You're right. I can see that. I'm beginning to think that history points to a compounding effect of targeting one group for decades. Hundreds of years of violence and racism manifest in the inequalities and the community deficits that we see today.
Wow. Yes. We're not saying that Black people are victims here either. There are many Black people that are successful in spite of adversity.
And now that I think about it, there's also a compounding effect of not being the target. And when people are rewarded by not being the target, they begin to perceive themselves as inherently different.
Yeah, that's all part of the psychology of labels.
Which brings us to the last stage of the spiral, elimination.
Aiden, did you know that Hitler actually researched the treatment of Blacks in the US as a model for how to treat Jews in Germany? We all know that there are consequences when the other is targeted. The Holocaust was the elimination of 6 million.
Injustice targets people. Aiden, do you see it?
Yeah, I'm following. I read this quote in an article. It said, the Holocaust was not 6 million, it was 1 + 1 + 1. It matters.
Exactly, and today, remember, Breonna Taylor was 1.
Plus George Floyd.
Plus Ahmaud Arbery.
Plus the shootings in Charleston and Buffalo. We're dealing with the elimination of real people, aren't we?
Wow. This is getting heavy and real, and I have to go soon. We should continue this.
Yeah, to be continued, right?
Yeah, to be continued. To speak.
The spiral.
The spiral speak?
Spiral speak.
I like the sound of that. I'm on board. Spiral speak.